Hello and welcome to Console Shock Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev, and as always, Stu. How's it going, Stu?
Yes, it's going well, Trev. Going well. I've got back into bloody Call of Duty, and it's just
giant cut person.
Yeah, it's just adrenaline. What was it? It just gets me on edge, gets me excited for 40 minutes, and I'm thinking, I want to find a game to get into that's not Call of Duty, but I just seem to keep on playing Call of Duty.
Oh, fair enough.
So I'm a little bit annoyed about that, but I'm quite enjoying playing Call of Duty, and
nice.
There you go.
And the last thing I played was, well, to a hardcore degree, was Ratchet and Clank 3 from the Ratchet and Clank trilogy on the PS3. Well, I was playing it through RPCS3. I wasn't playing it on a real PlayStation 3. I didn't start the not because I really want to dive deep into it right now, but there's a ton of Ratchet and Clank games that were on the PS3. There's like about 6 of them, I think. I
always got the impression they were kind of like side budget. They were never like full price.
They could like bang them out. They banged them out pretty quick, didn't they? There was like one every year or something. And then we got to sort of the one on the PS5, and then which I haven't played. I'm kind of waiting to try and get through some of the others before I do, and haven't really been seen since then. Well, there wasn't really one on the PS4. There was a remake of the first Ratchet and Clank on the PS4. It didn't have its own unique one, and that's basically been it. But yeah, I started playing the first PS3 one, which was Tools of Destruction, which doesn't run brilliant through RPCS3 on a Steam Deck. You can get kind of about 40 frames. I think it was a 60 frames a second game on the PS3. But you do notice there was a big jump in graphical kind of quality. It's like a Pixar movie on the PS3 when they got to the PS3 generation. And Tools of Destruction, the first one, I've sort of died on like the first level of it, but it's pretty good. But you definitely do notice the production value definitely jumped up when they got to the PS3. That game, I mean, it looks great now, but that's from 2007. So that's like, bloody hell, that's 20 years ago now. Kind of makes you think about how things kind of, have progressed, but in some ways haven't. In terms of like graphics and things like that, we kind of hit like, a point where you don't get those big gains anymore that you used to. And that's something that I noticed when playing that, really. But yeah, we're going to take a different approach today. Well, last time we had a guest on, which is something we do fairly often, and often we just pick a topic and we just talk about that throughout the whole episode. But today, we're actually going to do a kind of a Q&A thing where I've stolen a bunch of questions that I've heard on other podcasts. You may have heard as well if you listen to, Nerd Nest and Digital Foundry podcasts and things like that. Obviously you got their takes on all this stuff, but I thought it would be interesting for you to hear what we would think on some of these things. So we're going to touch on a whole different bunch of things. Probably a quick one to start off with, which is more of a general one. Buy a Steam controller. Or are you interested in the Steam controller, Stu?
No. And for two reasons. I bought a controller, read some reviews, got a controller off Amazon for my PC, and it runs like it is perfect. It's really good. And the whole point is on the Steam controller, they've really fucked up because they put the analog stick. They're following like the layout of the PlayStation controller. No one uses the PlayStation controller. So that's the first reason. It's in the wrong way around. No, well, they don't.
PS5. They get their PS5. They throw the DualSense out a window and say "F you, DualSense," and they go and get an Xbox controller. I don't know if it even works on a PS5. I doubt it does. But even if it didn't, I'd rather not play if you had to use the DualSense, right? Just have the PS5.
Well, exactly. Why copy something that doesn't work? And the second issue, I don't like the touchpads. I've tried to get used to them, and it's just like, no, I want a mouse and a keyboard to properly be able to play the games properly, not with those silly little pads. And I know they're quite good if you're sitting on a sofa, but if you're sitting on a sofa, you shouldn't be writing emails. You shouldn't be playing games that need those. You should be playing action games, football games, shooting games, games where you don't need them.
Yes, I'm with you to an extent with that, but there are things like I've been playing. There's a few like old PC games that were mouse and keyboard only that I've actually played on the Steam Deck using the Steam Deck controls, which pretty much are analogous to this new controller. So you would be able to transfer them across the sort of the controller profile. But right now I'm playing Star Trek Elite Force 2, which is a game from like 2003, a Windows only game. Never got a console port, nothing. It was just a keyboard. It's an FPS keyboard and mouse game. And I managed to set up all the buttons, the various buttons on the Steam Deck, tried to make it kind of similar to the controls you would have now with a first-person shooter, like a Call of Duty or something. And it works brilliant. I mean, the sort of the WASD controls are mapped to the left stick. The mouse look is mapped to the right stick. I like to fiddle with the sort of sensitivity of that right stick to kind of make it feel, like it was a native kind of controller FPS. But I managed to do it, and I'm able to get through. I mean, it's not something you would want to play multiplayer with that. You get your ass kicked, of course.
But Trevor, could you not have done it with a normal pad?
If you're, I'm talking. This is when I'm holding the Steam Deck in my hand.
Oh, of course, the Steam Deck.
But in saying that, you did that and you plugged it in docked, there's one thing already that would get in the way. You'd have to remap all the keys to whatever controller you're using when you're docked. You can't just take that Steam Deck layout and just apply it to an Xbox. You'd have to rebuild it into the Xbox layout, which you could do. Nothing to stop you doing, but it's another 20 minutes of trying to do that. But there are little bits when you have to like unlock a door or unlock some kind of area, and you've got to do a mini game to do that, and that needed the mouse. You can't use any kind. You can't. But for those, obviously, I could just use the trackpad. And they don't need to be super precise. It's just to like point and click on something in like a funny little puzzle mini game. So the trackpads are great for that. Unfortunately, if I was using an Xbox controller with the Steam Deck docked on a TV, that bit I would struggle with. You could kind of try and fake it with the joysticks, but I'd probably have to dig out a mouse to get through those bits. But with the Steam controller, I could use the trackpads to do that. And there's also things like, getting through launchers. You want to play a game that just has a launcher like Ubisoft Connect or EA Play, whatever, that's kind of tunneled through Steam. It's a bit easier to navigate those when you can just trackpad your way to the OK button. Yeah.
I think I was being a little bit flippant, really, about the touch pads, and it's useful to have them and not have them because there is some utility in them. But I still think they made a mistake by because all PC gamers, and that's where it naturally sits, will use an Xbox style controller. That layout, that is the default layout. So having the D-pad and the left analog stick the other way round, though there's probably arguments, this might be a little bit better, or we talk to people and that's what people wanted, then I'm not I don't know the reasons for it. I'm not seeing, I've watched a bit of coverage about it on Digital Foundry and IGN and a couple of other things, and they mentioned it, but they never said it as a sort of a negative or anything. And do you know what? I don't like the look of it.
Right. Yeah.
I know that's like, well, what's the matter? It's a controller, but I don't like the look of it. It looks a bit too.
It's not quite a Steam Deck with just the screen chopped off, is it? It does have a sort of an odd sort of shape.
Because your hands are closer together, it's a slightly different angle.
Yeah,
apparently.
It's more like the Joy-Cons, isn't it? Plugged into the Joy-Con dock when you dock to Switch. It almost has that shape, that very boxy sort of shape. Yeah.
Are you going to buy one?
Well, it sold out pretty much instantly. I was gonna. It was annoying because it was like Sunday or Saturday, I think, when it actually was coming available, like 5 in the afternoon, for 5 in the evening here. And I sort of mentally, I was like, okay, right, I'll try and jump on at 5, and like I was just at home, so it was something I would have been able to do. But I ended up like some point in the afternoon, I ended up going off and doing something, and completely it dropped off my mind. And I remembered at like 5:30, and I was like, oh crap, I should try and jump in and see if I can get a Steam controller. But soon when I went on, it was sold out. People had absolutely spammed the crap out of it, and it sold out. But it's not a big deal. I mean, I use, I've mentioned it before, we've just took the piss out of the DualSense, but I do really like it as a controller. I use the DualSense with my Steam Deck, and it's pretty good. It wakes the Steam Deck from sleep, which a lot of controllers don't do. It's got the little trackpad at the top to kind of do those, getting through a launcher.
True,
that works on the Steam Deck. All the various Steam Deck all the various DualSense features pretty much work. It's great for like I bang on about how great RPCS3 is for playing PS3 games. Obviously, it's great for that because the layout's identical to a DualShock 3. You can use a DualShock 3 as well on the Steam Deck. I've actually done that with some of my DualShock 3s. And also with RPCS3, there are games that do use the 6-axis motion. Funny enough, Ratchet and Clank Tools of Destruction is one. There are sequences that require you to use the six axis and like literally physically move the controller around to like dodge objects. There's no way around that. You have to use a PlayStation controller because RPCS3 can emulate the 6-axis if it's a controller that has that. And the PlayStation controllers are the ones that do, the ones from the PS3 onwards. So it's almost required if you're going to be playing those games that have those, 6-axis, something like Flower or Flow, which are you don't press any buttons on those games, do you? It was all just
around,
waving the 6-axis. Yeah. So if you're playing that in RPCS3, you'd have to use a DualSense or a DualShock 3 or 4. But yeah, no, I'm planning on getting one because when it is docked, it'll be nice to those games where I've set those controller profiles, like I just mentioned, Elite Force 2. It'd be nice then they'll just automatically just work on the Steam Deck controller. I don't have to reprogram the buttons into whatever controller I'm using. And to be honest, I think I agree with you in the sense that from what I'm describing, I'm kind of just describing getting through a menu or maybe an FPS where you can kind of map those controls and they kind of feel the same as a joystick. But playing like SimCity, where you are absolutely 100% mouse, I'm not sure how good those little trackpad. I've never really done any game like that, but
that's
would be great for that.
I don't think they're they're not a replica. A mouse and keyboard, that's what you need. Maybe a proper sort of trackpad on a laptop you can sort of do it with.
Yeah.
Like I sent you a message the other day, was like, how do I make the keyboard come up on the Steam Deck? And you were like, oh, press this and press that. And I was like, all right, okay, thanks. That's actually really helpful. So thanks for letting me know that. But the fact was, I was, doing something which would have taken seconds on a PC or on an iPhone. Was just like, right, okay, I'm on it. I've got to put my email in here. I've managed to move the cursor. I've clicked on it, and then how do I write? How do I get the keyboard out? I was swiping up from the bottom, from the left. I was pressing all the buttons on the front. I was doing this, and then eventually, I was like, "Oh, you press this and do that," and I was like, "Right, okay." And then the screen isn't great on a Steam Deck for typing, so I think I don't know this. I like the idea now. For me, a Steam Deck is, download a game off the Steam Deck which says playable on the Steam Deck.
Pure controller stuff, yeah.
Pure controller, and then that is what I will play. I can't be.
And like the trackpad will get you past like clicking OK to click the OK button on the launcher. That's
it. That's as far. I can't be scrolling down. And I went into desktop mode no, what was it, desktop mode. And then I was like, okay, well, how do I get back to the actual Steam Deck mode?
Gaming mode.
Gaming mode. And I made it into big picture mode. So I was still in desktop mode, but in big picture mode. And I ended up just turning it off and turning it on again. To try and,
there should be an icon on the desktop.
Of course, there is, Joe. There is a way to do it. There is a way to do it, but I was just getting irritated with it because I'm doing all of this. It's just irritating. But
I get it. I mean, the closest I've come to sort of a more heavily
window.
Throwing out the window level, is I played the PC version of Oblivion, the original version of Oblivion. Actually, when I first got the Steam Deck, the remastered version, wasn't out then. It's only come out last year, and that's obviously completely. You can use a keyboard and a mouse if you want, but it's completely controller compatible as well. But the original Oblivion on the PC wasn't at all. Although there were console versions of that game, and they were obviously are completely controller driven. But the PC version, they didn't really try and implement any of that PS3 and Xbox 360 control scheme. But the layout that I was able to use, it felt like playing it as if I was playing the PS3 version. But when the menus of to go and check your inventory and your quests and navigating the map, that was still, you needed the mouse. But the trackpad worked okay for that. But that wasn't really actually doing actions, and I'm not clicking and dragging a section of a terrain out in SimCity or having to click here to fire a weapon. That was just selecting items in a menu. So fairly, low key, not twitchy stuff. And that's probably the most hardcore I've had to use the mouse on, with those trackpads. And I've used it in the desktop mode if I've got to just move a file into something. And it's okay for that. But I can't really see playing Max Payne. The first two Max Paynes, I completed them on the Steam Deck, but that was from mapping the WASD to the left stick and the look to the right and just tweaking the sensitivity, and that made it work fine. But again, that's not a game where you point and clicked at things and had to do minute little things with the mouse pointer. So like a SimCity, games like that are heavy pointing and clicking things. I'm not sure how comfortable they are, dragging things, and I've got SimCity 2000. I think I've got on the re-releases that they've put maybe on GOG. I might try it for fun and see how annoying it is just using the trackpad. But
I just think that'll be. I think we. What do you think about the? I don't know if we talked about this in the last episode, but the Game Pass dropping in price.
Well, I haven't. I got rid of my Game Pass a long time ago now, and I've got rid of. I don't actually have PS Plus anymore because I barely play my PS5. It's basically there just for GTA 6 when it comes out. It doesn't really. I mean, it's good that it's cheaper. The only one that I'd be remotely interested in would be the PC version. But these days, I'm the sort of $12.99 or whatever it is at the moment, which is obviously better than 20 odd quid, whatever it went up to. I kind of feel like I'd rather spend that money on. I'll look at my Steam wish list, and I could probably easily find 4 or 5 games that are a couple of quid each that are buried in my wish list that I would spend that money on, and they're games that I'm more liable to play, and they're permanently mine. I don't. If I cancel the subscription, not going to get deleted.
No,
I can't see myself subscribing again. To be honest, what about you?
Yeah, well, I've gone back. I dropped down to the PC Game Pass when they announced the price when the price went up, basically. So and I was disappointed. I talked about that before. It's a service that I use quite a lot, and I certainly got my money's worth from it. So I have upgraded back to PC Ultimate, Game Pass Ultimate, and just because it's I probably do 80% of the gaming on my PC, but it is sort of nice to have some games actually sit better playing them on the sofa, on the big screen, through your Xbox. So, and it's been good to do that, and I've enjoyed having that without having to, go and sit in the room by myself and sort of play on that. So I'm quite chuffed about it that they put the price down, and I think it's a good thing, and it seems like Xbox are kind of, or Microsoft are kind of sort of listening a little bit more to what the fans want, what people want, and things like that. And I actually think, sort of bigger picture, that they actually might sort of leave PlayStation behind. So I think PlayStation's a little bit like, we're happy with the console model. That's what we're doing, the console model. Buying games, subsidized console, and I sort
You're
of
locked down to our store, and
exactly. And I like the idea of, we talked about it before. We don't know all the details, like Project Helix, the Steam machine, and so on, where it's kind of like the consoleizing the PC, and that will be potentially will make up a whole new genre, not genre, if that's the right word, but category of micro consoleized PCs, and that so I think hopefully, or not hopefully, I think Xbox will be part of that. And from my point of view, is I always want to see competition between PlayStation, Nintendo, Steam, Xbox, on who can offer the best value, who can offer the best games and the ways to play them, and things like that. And you don't want a situation where PlayStation's just, oh yes, we've got 150 million PlayStation 5 sold, and we can charge what we want, and there's no innovation and things like that. You want everyone trying to push forward, actually how do people play in 2026? Do they want to play on a portable? Do they want to play on a computer but underneath the TV? Do they want to play actually on a great big flashing colourful box with RGB lighting and a 5090, or do people want to play on a console, on a normal console plugged into a TV that's costing 250 quid? How do people want to play? And it's all about covering everything, really.
They're kind of the odd one out now a little bit. Well, I guess Nintendo is kind of there as well. I don't think they're ever going to change, but
no.
Yeah, it's difficult to see how that dedicated console, lockdown, subsidized, relying on exclusives, is going to kind of continue to be successful, really. There's you buy a game on that system and it's locked down to that system. You might not be able to play it in 7 or 8 years when the next version of that console comes out, or you'd have to buy a remake or something. With a Steam Deck or a Steam machine, or any kind of a PC, really, you've got basically backwards compatible all the way up to the beginning of the PC, essentially. Obviously you're going to have to work around a little bit to get some janky Windows 95 game working, but you could probably do it. You're not going to be able to get a late 90s era PlayStation game running on the PS5 unless they happen to have it in as a backwards compatible game. You certainly won't be able to put the disc in to get it to work. You can't even play PS3 games apart from the handful that maybe they've set up some kind of emulation for on the PS5. It's certainly a far cry from the PS3, which could do 1, 2, and 3. Although later on they obviously took out the PS2 emulation from the PS3, but from day one you could put those discs in your PS3 and it'll be able to play them, which was pretty damn cool. And I mean, you could basically just have a PS3 if you get the original fat version of the PS3 and the PS5, just those two. You could basically play every PlayStation game. The PlayStation 3 you're covered for 1, 2, and 3. The PS5 will do the PS4 as well, so you've got all the generations in one go there if you have those two systems. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Mm.
The future with Xbox being a bit more of an open platform, and it'll probably let you play your Steam games as well as your Xbox games. I don't know how far back they'll go. Maybe it'll just match what kind of an Xbox series can play. So sort of a handful of original Xbox, a decent chunk of Xbox 360, all of Xbox One, all of Xbox Series. I think if this new Helix can do all of that, I think that's pretty good. On top of your Steam games. And whatever Origin, EA, if they can do all of that, I think that's and it's not insanely expensive. I think that's pretty good. The Steam machine falls in that same category, except you're probably a little bit more locked out of the Windows sort of anti-cheat games and things like that. But there might be a solution for that in the future, so that's not a terminal thing. But we'll have to see how that progresses. But SteamOS is pretty damn ahead of anywhere where Windows is in terms of, living room kind of compatibility and comfort. You've got Xbox mode now or for Xbox full screen experience on Windows, but it's quite janky still. Certainly not as good as SteamOS gaming mode. They've got a lot of catching up to do there, but yeah, I mean, I don't think the PS6 doesn't really appeal to me. The handheld does, and that's probably the only PlayStation that I'll get will be the handheld, because I love handhelds, and that'll have some the Sony exclusives will be on that. Plus, you probably will be able to play PS4 and maybe all of PS5 on it, which is pretty cool. I'm not sure how you'll get your PS4 games and your PS5 games on it. I mean, to be honest, it might just be PS Plus, but that's still pretty good. And then there's a question of, I guess you'd have to buy all the games digitally to play them on that handheld. You can't get a PS6 disc, and I don't think they'll provide a mechanism to be able to transfer that license to the handheld or something. I could be wrong, but yeah, I just can't see it. So there's those questions, but actually that kind of leads us into the QA. And there's one I actually want to nick straight away from Digital Foundry that kind of leads into or leads off from what we've just been talking about. I heard them talk about this on Digital Foundry.
Was it who's the guy that puts a letter, a question every week, and he's got a really funny name?
Oh, there's loads of them.
Oh, I can't remember.
They've all got pretty gnarly names.
Yeah, the way that
the question that
reads them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. He has a way with that. But the one that piqued my interest was, when does a console become a PC? So again, we touched upon this a little bit already, haven't we? I mean, in my eyes, they're all computers, and there's a degree of them being personal. So they're all kind of, if you want to interpret the name personal computer. For this question, I think a personal computer, probably going to be something like what we're talking about is like Windows and x86 CPU, and probably a Mac and something like a Commodore Amiga and an Atari ST. They're personal computers. A console is a PlayStation 5, Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo, GameCube, Sega Dreamcast. They're all consoles. They just are for games. You can't do your homework on them. You can't edit a video on them. They just do games, and they're optimized for that. So that's whereas the Windows and x86 combination, you can do everything on. It's a general purpose computer. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we got to you had quite a long time where consoles would have their own custom CPU and GPU that didn't really look like anything that you'd have on the PC. They might have had similar CPUs like the 68,000, was in the Mega Drive and the Commodore Amiga, but they did very different things. And then you had we got to the Xbox, which actually had an Intel chip in it and an NVIDIA graphics processor. But then we went to, the Xbox 360 and PS3, which are Power PC. Macs had Power PC at that same point in time. But again, not much like what you'd be using Windows with. But then you got to the Xbox One and the PS4, and they started using AMD graphics and AMD CPUs, just like PCs, well, Intel, whatever, but the same x86 sort of stuff. And they've stayed that way now. So really, all the games console is kind of an x86 computer, or an x86/64 computer. That's just locked down to a certain store and is locked down to a certain kind of disk.
I think that's
would you
the
say
key.
that's the case?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, when you sort of ask the question, when's a console become a PC? I was like, well, a console becomes a PC when you can edit a Word document, and that's almost like the cutoff point. Because if you think about a PS4, an Xbox One, a Series X, it's an AMD processor, with a hard drive. It's got obviously a graphics APU on there as well, so it's got all the same components. But you hit the nail on the head. It's locked down, so you can only buy games from one store. But then that's when it's a console. But they are obviously, the lines are blurring, because on lots of things you can do on a PC, you can do on an Xbox or a PlayStation 5. For example, watch YouTube, or you can. I think they have browsers on them, but I can imagine that's a little bit of a chore.
Yeah, they do kind of.
But there is certainly a little bit of crossover, because if you remember in the olden days, when people went round on a horse and cart, a console was, you turned it on, no gaming, you wouldn't get a picture. You had to put a game in, and that was literally all it did. And then you got the PlayStation 2, where you can watch DVDs on it, and then slowly they got a little bit more sort of functionality with them. But I think
really the CD-based consoles were the first time you had to kind of turn it on and have some kind of pre-game interface, like the Mega CD and things like that, and then you could either play a CD or just play the game. Yeah, before that, it was just you put the game in, it turned on, game, you were in the game. Yeah,
exactly. But I think the line's going to get even more blurry with things like the Steam machine, the Project Helix, and even going the other way is like PCs are turning into consoles, because I've got my PC here, and we talked about this before, but all my my emailing, my planning trips, my if I ever edit photos, that's always done on my Mac. So my PC is really just a games console, where you turn it on, and then I'm gaming. And then with things like the game Xbox gaming mode or whatever for Windows, then that's going to make it even more like a console. So PCs are getting closer to consoles are getting closer to PCs. So I'm sure at some point there will be a little bit more sort of crossover between the two.
I think the question sort of says, are the lines blurring, or when does a console become a PC? But unlike the dedicated console side, they aren't really trying to move towards being a PC. They might, like you say, they might have a web browser, so you can kind of slightly jankily browse the web, but I'm not sure if they even do that much these days. I remember the Dreamcast had DreamKey, which is the web browser. You could literally go on the web. The Saturn, I think, probably had a browser before that, because in America you had a modem you could get for it. I remember the PS3 had a web browser. You could download Internet Explorer for the Xbox 360. So yeah, they did sort of step into that territory a little bit, but they were never going to be, they were never going to let you put Word, Microsoft Word on it and like edit spreadsheets, and they're not interested in doing that, really. And the PS5 hasn't really touched any of that stuff. At best, it will just do it will kind of mimic like smart TV things, like it'll have a YouTube app. And then it'll have like, maybe there's a Spotify app, stuff. Maybe it'll let you put a USB stick in and look at your photos. That's about as close as it edges towards the PC sort of arena. Whereas the other side, I mean, the PCs have always been super versatile, so it's not really weird that they would try and, reach out to other aspects of computing. They've always been a jack of all trades, really. But we've definitely seen I think SteamOS has really lit a fire under everyone's arse, Microsoft especially, no one was really bothered about trying to make it easier for people to make gaming on their PC or in front of their 60-inch TV easier. They just thought, well, you could do it, but you probably need like a keyboard and a mouse on your lap, and you're going to struggle, looking okay on things. And you've always been able to do that. No one's stopped you, but no one's ever really tried to help you. Whereas now with SteamOS, well, you had Steam big picture mode, because they obviously acknowledge that, look, some people are just plugging their PCs into the telly and they want to just game that way. So maybe we can help them out a little bit. Even that's still quite janky. SteamOS itself, though, is by far the best example of a PC edging into the console territory. But you wouldn't really ever want it to become a console because you don't want it to be locked down. That's why it's interesting with Helix, isn't it? What is it going to be closer to? Is it going to be closer to the PlayStation/Nintendo, where everything's kind of locked down? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it with Project Helix. Is for me, it's one of the most exciting things of actually what are they planning? Because we talk about it a lot on here. Is it's like, well, is it just going to be a PC with a you turn it on, it says Xbox, and you do all the same things as a PC. It's going to be really interesting to see sort of what their sort of business model, going forward, sort of with it is. So that's sort of quite exciting. But I wanted to sort of make the point of, I remember sort of PC gaming sort of 15, 20 years ago, and installing a game, sometimes you needed to have literally, you need to be a computer genius to install a game. And there'd be any number of crazy reasons why the game wouldn't work, or it wouldn't be this, or you had to do that. You had to open it up and put in different hardware to get the game running. But I'd actually argue that now consoles are you go on Steam, you press install, you're on the Xbox, you press install, you're on Epic Games, they give you free games, you press install. And literally on my PC, it's really completely removed that you need to be I don't know. And I remember the times of having, back when I was at school or younger, you would sort of know people, hold on, it's come up with this error. What do you do? Oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, and it seemed to be like a real. So that's what that was the advantage of the consoles was. Well, you put the game in, 2 seconds later you're playing. Oh, it's brilliant. You haven't got to think. You haven't got to. It
did get a bit blurry sometimes though, because you had like obviously the Commodore Amiga. You just put the floppy disk in and it would just run the game. You didn't have to go into a menu, and that was kind of a bit more of a console experience. But an Amiga was also you could do your homework on it, edit photos, and or maybe not in those days, but make music and stuff, and make and do artwork, and But certainly on Windows, there's always been a lot of friction. And nowadays, like you say, you can, if you're playing fairly modern games, okay, you may have to deal with a launcher where you just have to click OK or sign into EA Play or something. But
that's not fine. That's okay. Yeah. But then sometimes I quite like, I've talked about my retro Windows XP game, and it's like, oh god, the game doesn't work. It's come up with this error. Then you go looking for patches, and it's almost like a little game in itself. You go your PC gaming wiki, or you play around with settings. You try and change this, or you read blog posts about it, and then it's quite satisfying when you get it working. But there's still a level of knowledge you've got to have to understand.
Yeah, it's not a plug and play kind of experience.
It's not plug and play. No.
That'll be that's one of the interesting aspects of Helix. I mean, I think it's going to lean much more towards the Windows side, but you can have as much. Your experience can be quite close to the console, where maybe you only just play Xbox games. You just go and get the disc, pop it in, and it will just play it. And maybe some fairly recent PC games, it will let you kind of log into Steam, download the game, run it. Maybe you've got to get past the launcher, but that's about as bad as it will get.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I would love to see get my copy of Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, the Windows XP game, put that into the Xbox Project Helix, and what's going to happen? Is it going to? How easy it is to install that game? Have I just got to go into Windows mode, desktop mode, or whatever the equivalent to that will be, fiddle around, get it going? Because probably a game of Windows XP sort of vintage, you probably have to edit config files and do that. Can I do all that? And then I can jump back into, having got it all set up, I can then jump back into gaming mode, grab my controller, and bang, I can play that game as if it was like, a native console game. I'm happy to deal with that sort of friction if it means that I can get a game like that working. And that's probably where the Helix will, I think it will let us do that. So it will kind of lean closer to the Windows section, while at the same time it can be a complete console experience as well if you never touch any of that janky old stuff that perhaps me and you would. So yeah, I think the PlayStations and the Nintendos are going to be very locked down and rigidly stick to their closed. I mean, like I said, architecturally they're basically PCs, AMD APUs, NVIDIA graphics, architectures. But the walled garden of their OSs and things like that basically makes them just like a Super Nintendo back in the day. Whereas Helix and Steam machines, you kind of have three categories of sort of tech in that sense for these. You're going to have the sort of general all-purpose PCs that will just run Windows like they always have. There'll be gaming console PCs, which is the Steam machine, Steam Deck, the handhelds that use kind of slightly janky Xbox experience at the moment in Windows, but Project Helix will be in that category. And then you've just got the consoles, and that's all they do. They'll be like a DVD player versus a PC. You just want to be able to put your disc in, watch the movie, or you get a PC, then you can like watch the movie and also do your homework. It's kind of it'll kind of be like that. So yeah, I mean that was that one. Another one that I think would be an interesting one, that's a little bit more of a retro-focused one, is what do you think was the biggest leap of console generation? So when you went from like NES to Super Nintendo, Mega Drive to Sega Saturn, which one was like, wow, that is an incredible like jump in graphics?
I think it's got to be the jump from the Atari 2600 to the Atari 5200.
100%.
Right, my real answer is
the Atari ST 520 to the Atari ST 1040. Yeah,
basically, yeah. The Amiga 5. We can go on all night. The Amiga 500
to 500 plus.
It was that plus that made the difference, wasn't it? It was just like night and day.
112 kilobytes.
Yeah. Seriously, it was a jump from Super Nintendo, Mega Drive to PlayStation 1, 3DO, Sega Saturn, N64. That to
16-bit to 32-bit.
16 to 32-bit. That was like, wow, we can play different types of games now. We've got great big open 3D worlds where you thought they were big and open compared to what they are today. They're probably a fraction of the size, but in reality, that was like, wow. That was we're playing arcade quality games here. This is amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. A lot of people sort of, when I've seen this question on like Twitter or something like that, tend to cite the sort of the jump from the PS1 to the PS2 eras, which I can see why. But I think that was more of a polishing of what was already established. in the PlayStation generation. Games that were kind of would struggle to hit 30 frames would actually now be able to get to 60. And they'd finally figured out that you should use the right stick for camera instead of just some janky thing that we had to deal with on like the PS1, you know. But yeah, I completely agree. We were playing games on like flat 2D planes, really, with the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo. There was the odd 3D game, and there was a lot more 3D stuff on the Amiga, like flight simulators, basically any kind of a simulator game. But on the consoles, it was tile-based, flat-planed games where, you know, the platformer was basically the sort of FPS of its era, really. And, you know, you had racing games, which are kind of pseudo 3D. And there was the odd genuinely polygonal-based 3D game, like you had Super FX games on the Super Nintendo. The Mega Drive did have some flight simulators. It had virtual racing. But they were extremely... and you were sort of looking at 10 frames a second in those games. But to go from that to games like... you know, like even racing games, like to go from like a Lotus Challenge on the Mega Drive to Ridge Racer on the PS1. You know, we can have different camera angles and, you know, replays of things, and just the sound experience and the visual experience was just something you couldn't really recreate in any way on a 16-bit system. You know, virtual racing notwithstanding, but that looks, you know, doesn't look anything like, you know, Ridge Racer. Half the frame rate, you know, you can barely see 5 meters in front of the race car that you're in.
Yeah, but if you look at, you know, having there are a few outliers, but when you had the a Super Nintendo or let's say, you know, a Mega Drive, and then when you got to PlayStation 1, you had games, or the Sega Saturn, like Panzer Dragoon, you had games like Resident Evil that came out, Tomb Raider. And and actually, you know, like Ridge Racer, like you know, Gran Turismo. You go. Like, I still remember playing Gran Turismo. I can't remember, Autumn Ring or something. Where you're driving down and there's trees on either side, and you were wow, this is. Whew, you know, will graphics ever get better than this? You know, that's what I used to think, and. But that was the reality. That was a huge jump, an absolute huge jump, and you couldn't even, you know, things like virtual racing on the Mega Drive. You know, a great effort they did. I'm not taking anything away from that, but if you put that next to, you know, Gran Turismo 1, and it was clearly sort of, you know, night and day between them, and then things like, you know, Tekken. Things like what are other sort of games that sort of really sort of push the boundaries on Crash Bandicoot. You know, I know they use lots of tricks and stuff to you know, that's why it's always curved, so you can never see things in the distance, and then also the other thing is how you've got games which were so much bigger. And, you know, for example, there was a whole controversy with Squaresoft at the time where all the Final Fantasy games has always come out on Nintendo, and something like an N64 cartridge can hold, you know, what was it, 50 meg, something like that, where a CD can hold 600.
Wasn't a lot. Yeah.
And then obviously you can use 2 CDs, 3, 4. I don't think no games were for 5, but the point was that now you're going, hold on, I can play games where I'm, you know, I'm going to completely a huge world, and you know, you can explore the, you know, all the different corners of a huge world, and then that was, you know, gave people the opportunity to actually make games that are different, and led to sort of new sort of genres of games. And, you know, you had RPGs, but never really had them to the same scale as you know, Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and you know, again, things like Resident Evil, and that sort of stands out. People are probably shouting, "What about this game? What about that game?" But it was completely sort of night and day.
Yeah, I think two good examples that really show the difference between like a Mega Drive and a PlayStation, or Super Nintendo and N64. I mean, on the Nintendo side, it'll be Mario 64. When you
Mm.
compare that to like Super Mario World,
Oh yeah.
it's an absolutely insane leap, and it's only 6 years
Mm.
the difference between those two games. And well, you could go like Super Mario World 2 was like 1995, and then Mario 64 was the next year. And
Mm.
to go from like, basically just try to get from A to B on a flat plane
Mm.
versus, jumping in through a painting and then landing in like a completely open, well, not an open world like we have now where you can travel for miles, but a pretty open plans, map, and you can see a mountain in the distance, and you can go and run up that mountain to the top and look down and see all the terrain around you that you've just been to, or run back down again and go back down there. And in all three dimensions, you can walk around, and it felt like you really
Mm.
were inhabiting an actual world, and not just
Mm.
like something that was kind of drawn on a flat bit of paper. Um, it's not taking anything away from platform games; they're still brilliant, but they're also extremely limited as to what you could do in like a Mario 64, and 3D platformers. I know they kind of became a bit of a running joke that all you do is kind of collect stuff and they're just collectathons, but really Mario 64 was kind of a blueprint for every kind of open world game from that point.
Mm.
I know it wasn't open world in the sense that it's just one giant map. It was individual little kind of courses that you
Mm.
did, but that first level, like where you've got the bomb, the king bomb at the top of the mountain, and you've got a race Cooper up that mountain. That first level seemed ginormous, like it was an entire, you know, like a world.
Mm.
And there's nothing really on the 16-bit systems that could recreate that. I mean, you had like Hunter on like the Amiga, which is basically kind of Grand Theft Auto, a very crude polygonal, pretty awesome.
Mm.
It was kind of an open world, a 3D open
Mm.
world, but a lot jankier compared to Mario 64. That's the only thing that even remotely gets there. And then you've got like on the PlayStation side, it'll be like Metal Gear Solid, um,
Oh yeah,
which
of
is
course, Metal Gear
basically,
Solid.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's basically a movie, an interactive movie. And not, I don't like I mean in the Mega CD sense. I mean
Mm.
genuinely in like it feels like a modern game, like really, the elaborate cutscenes, and the gameplay's fairly basic in a weird way. You're just kind of
Mm.
trying to sneak through individual sections, but there were obviously the previous Metal Gear games were 2D games, but like the cutscenes and like the feeling of like you're in the voice acting, and none of that could be done in like on certainly not on a cartridge. Um, so Metal Gear Solid for me is a real show someone a game from the Mega Drive era that came before the PlayStation, and then show them Metal Gear Solid, and they would look like they were like decades apart.
Oh yeah.
When it's only
Yeah.
really a handful of years. It's still the
Mm.
'90s. The Metal Gear Solid came out. Um, so yeah, that certainly gave
Mm.
and you've got like the generations after. I think when you went from the PS1 to the PS2, yeah, that was a big leap. The graphics
Yeah.
really looked like the CG renders that you would have on the
Yeah.
boxes of the previous generation.
I,
And they
I would
yeah, they would
actually.
look like
Yeah.
yeah,
So I was going to say, I think the bigger leap was from the PlayStation 2 generation to actually to the Xbox 360, PS3, because that was when
yeah,
now for one, you went to HD, but it wasn't just that. It wasn't going to HD. It was all the sort of you had your friends lists on there. You could go online. You could talk to people. You could communicate, and the game
yeah,
suddenly became. And this was obviously the technology from the the TVs. They just became a lot more, a lot more
HD
engrossing.
resolutions and like
HD resolutions. It was getting more like sort of PC gaming, where you had the much higher resolutions. Things were just clearer. Because I mean, I can't. Obviously, I always remember playing PS1, PS2, and through a composite or an RF, and then sort of seeing a 360 where it's like, oh my god, everything's so clear. Oh wow, it's clear. It's
it was like a
yeah,
PC monitor. It It was like what you would be used to from a PC monitor, which was always very clear. But now you had that on a TV, with a half decent connection. Yeah, that was really cool. And the games look super sharp. A lot of people take the mick out of those early 360 eras being lots of greys and browns and things. That sort of Unreal Engine 3 sort of, cliche. But yeah, I mean, there was a bit of you did lose the frame rate a little bit. Most games were 30 now, as opposed to being mostly 60 on like the PS2 era. But I kind of feel like they were at those frame rates because they were just taking the PS1 kind of sensibilities in terms of graphics fidelity and just, make them a bit more dense in terms of the polygon models and the meshes. But that left a lot of overhead for more frame rate. Whereas when you got to the 360 and the PS3, they wanted to push those graphics to the absolute max to really show a big leap from that previous generation. But that meant they had to sort of cut that frame rate down so they could, just densely fill the screen with so much detail to get that, make the most of that 720p sort of thing, or, the odd 1080p that we would have. Not very often, things like Ridge Racer 7, that was 1080p, but you can count them on one hand, really, in terms of games that really were 1080p in that era. And that leads me on, actually, to like the last question. We're nearly at the end of the show now. Should be one that we probably would have tons to talk about, but bit of a Digital Foundry centric one here as well. But is native resolution still important, or are upscalers like DLSS and the FSR good enough for now? So we may want to just break down what that is there, because obviously not everybody on this listens to this are totally up to speed on what this even is. So the FSR is the one I'm most familiar with, but basically you can now, a fairly standard thing in PC gaming now is to run games. You pick the resolution that you want the final output to be. So you've got a 4K monitor, you want it to be 4K. And then you've got different, you can flip FSR on, and then you can choose different levels of FSR from like super performance or just ultra performance all the way up to quality. And ultra performance is where, in reality, the output ends up as 4K, but internally, the game is actually only being rendered at a much smaller resolution, maybe 720p. And then an algorithm, an AI, is actually trying to fill in the gaps and actually build the rest of the image to make it look as close to a 4K image as a native 4K image as possible. And then if you go up to like quality, the quality setting of FSR, it's a slightly higher resolution than what ultra performance was. Maybe it's more like 1440p. So it's got a little bit less to fill in terms to pad out that resolution and make it more like 4K. The upside is if you choose ultra performance, you'll get more frames per second because it's working from a lower base. Whereas quality mode, you won't get that big. There'll be a less of a increase in FPS because you're closer to the actual resolution that the output is. So yeah, Stu, what are your thoughts on FSR and DLSS?
Well, yeah, I think that they're good. From the point of view is that they're they're making sort of hardware go longer, sort of last longer because people can sort of rely on these software sort of advantages. Now, I obviously I do a lot of gaming on, and it was actually really good. You sort of explain that in a really good way for running performance and quality and sort of what they all meant, because I have to admit, I do get a little bit overwhelmed when you go on to, and I mentioned in the last episode that I was playing RoboCop, the unfinished saga or whatever it was called, the second Rogue City Unfinished Business, that's it. And that was, I got frustrated and because the frame rate was all over the place, and it was sit at like 140 frames a second, and then you go into another area and it would just suddenly drop down to like 12, then back up again. and I think it was that, going from one area to another, and so I was playing with the settings to try and get it. And it is a little bit daunting, because you're sitting there and you're going, well, actually, I want to get the best visual and experience out of playing this game, but then I don't want to, hold on, what do I change? What settings do I sort of look at, to make the frame rate higher, or to get a better sort of performance out of the game. So that's something I really sort of struggle with. But then on some games I have used the DLSS, and I found that actually you get a better sort of clarity out of it, and the game looks good and it feels fine to play. And then 2 minutes later you forget that you even changed settings, and you're just enjoying the game. So from that point of view, I haven't got an issue with it. But that's my thoughts on it. I'm not really fully understanding where it was always the best way to go.
I'm sure most people don't. Yeah, I'm sure most people don't know exactly how it works, but it's really cool technology, and obviously it means you can get extra performance from games where before you just have to maybe just drag the texture details down, or just play at a lower native resolution that would look quite blurry and very soft on whatever screen you're playing on. I've seen some amazing videos of DLSS is a little bit better than FSR. The results tend to be a bit better, although they're both evolving. And DLSS, I've seen some videos of people have done really crazy things with it, where they've actually got a game to render at like 360p internally. So, the resolution of like lower than like a Sony PSP screen, and have that use DLSS to blow that all the way up to 4K. You can imagine how much data or how much like picture information DLSS has got to work with to fill out an entire 4K array of pixels and have it look good. But some of the results look really damn good, not too far off a native 4K image. And obviously, the closer you are to 4K using balanced mode or quality mode, sometimes, certainly if your output is 4K, but you're using maybe balanced mode, so that would mean maybe it's rendering the game at actually 1080p internally. Something like that blown up to 4K, it looks practically the same to the untrained eye, and maybe even to someone with the trained eye, as a native 4K image. So you almost think like there's probably no point in rendering a game at the native image, because you're going to lose a ton of performance because your graphics card's got to work so much harder. I might as well just put it in balanced, get way more FPS. It looks pretty much the same to me as it would if it was in native 4K. I'm not really losing much. And I think as the years go by and the technology improves, it will become up to the point where, there's no point in rendering anything at native resolution, because you can't tell the difference, and you'll lose a bunch of performance if you try and render something native. And also, it's really great for handhelds. Handhelds can, spit out, especially when they're docked. Like the Switch 2 is a good example right now. Obviously, on that smaller screen, you can kind of get away with a lower internal resolution because it's a smaller screen. You're not going to see those details and sort of the gnarliness of the image that you might get from an upscaler. But when you pop your Switch 2 into a 70-inch 4K screen, you're going to need DLSS to do a lot of work to be able to have those games still look good on a big screen. But the Switch 2 hasn't got the computing power to be able to spit out a native 4K image. So it has to rely on DLSS to try and construct the image to look as good as possible from that lower base resolution. And the PC handhelds do it as well. The Steam Deck kind of has to deal with it's kind of stuck with older versions of FSR, but I think we'll get future handhelds will come out that will use, better versions of that. The PS6 handheld, I think, would be to be interested to see how that does, because that'll probably have access to the latest version of FSR of that era. And you could probably plug that into your TV and it will look like playing a dedicated 4K console. And then you take it out and it's back in your hands again, and it'll look great on that screen as well. So it's really important for those devices. And that's also, being able to render a game at a lower resolution than just have AI. fill in the gaps to make it look good on a big screen. Requires a lot less sort of power draw and things like that. So yeah, I think it can look bad at the moment using older versions of FSR. There's lots of fizziness and popping and trails of things on the screen, but that stuff will eventually get better and better and better, I think, and it already is.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly noticed that on a few games on the Steam Deck where it's had the FSR. Playing Resident Evil 4 was a good example. I think again you gave me the tip of turn it off on that. The Steam Deck can do it without it, and I was like, actually, it looked better without that. But it comes down to to me, it's all about one. You just got to have a nice performance, and I've enjoyed a game, and sometimes it's you decide, I'll put it on ultra, and then you go, actually, I want a higher frame rate. You put it down to medium, and then you're on the second level, and you've forgotten you even put it on medium or high or low or ultra. You're enjoying the game, so it's taken out that. That thought that you have to sort of not have, but that you can just really sort of just play the games and you haven't got to worry about it's all stuttering, it's rubbish, or I've got to invest £700 in a new graphics card or things like that. The way, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's like, well, actually, you can get more longevity. You might rely on these pieces of sort of software within it to to give your graphics card, your computer, more longevity. And people don't want to see sort of e-waste out there. They want to, you want to be able to use these things really until they. Something really good conk out, or something really good comes out, and there's a real sort of step up. And I've talked to them about it's. I've had my sort of gaming PC now for 3 years, and it's actually 3 years in May. So, and I think it's got another sort of good year or two in it before I even start to have to think about, should I? Start to get, put money together for a new one, or upgrade the graphics card, or does it need a new processor or more RAM? I think it's fine where it is for a long while. Yeah,
and I think another sort of aspect that goes hand in hand with FSR and DLSS is frame generation. It's kind of a controversial thing as well, because they're fake frames. It doubles your frame rate in theory, but you're not actually getting a more responsive game, because the sort of fake frames that are being inserted between the real ones aren't reading your controller inputs. It's just kind of generating a frame based on the one that's just happened and the one that's coming up. So it will look smoother, but you're not getting any more response. In fact, you might be losing a little bit, because the algorithm that's trying to come up with those fake frames is adding to the pipeline, the graphics pipeline, and there's also a minor performance cost as well. I found it most fun to use frame generation on emulators. The last show we talked about how I've been using it on RPCS3 for PS3 games that were locked to 30. These are games like, I think the Simpsons game was the example that I used, where the Simpsons game it's a 30 frames a second game, but it's a PS3 game. There's no menu you can go into to put it to 60. It's just permanently locked there. There are probably hacks that maybe can get it to work, but often they break the game. Whereas with frame generation, I can get it to run it's not actually running at 60 frames a second, but it looks like it is. And to be honest, it feels just as responsive as it did when I was playing it at 30. So it's kind of, there's no reason not to do it. And it makes those games kind of feel a lot more modern, weirdly, because they look smoother. And for that generation, especially that PS3 era, and if you don't want to resort to hacking them, if there even is the ability to do it on, a lot of the games, they won't be, you can just get that frame generation on with those games, and they instantly look smoother and better. Because most of that library was locked to 30 frames a second. And actually, if there's a 60 frames a second PS3 game like Ridge Racer 7, you can frame generation that up to 120. And you know, if you've got a monitor that can do 120, you're kind of getting all the frames you could possibly ever get from your monitor. So yeah, frame generation is a pretty cool tech as well. On modern games, it could be a mixed bag because you need a very high frame rate, I think, for it to really be effective. Like 60, really. The game has to be able to run at 60 already, and then you boost it up to 120 with your frame generation to get that real nice smoothness. It can work going from 30 to 60, but you might feel it. You might feel the slight extra bit of controller delay. Some people are more sensitive to that than others. I don't think I'm really massively sensitive to it, but I think that's a pretty cool element as well.
Yeah, the frame generation. What I tend to do is, like, when I'm playing Call of Duty, I don't have the frame generation on then, because that obviously it's the microsecond. You know, you're trying to shoot
feel
someone.
Yeah, especially with the mouse.
Exactly, you can really sort of feel it then. So I'll tend to have any sort of those things off. I remember playing last year. I played Indianapolis Jones and the Golden Circle, and that one I was actually using DLSS on that, I believe, and that I was actually this
a heavy game.
It's a heavy game, and there you're just like, you know, you beat up a few guys, you're sneaking around. It's not, you know, you're trying to work out puzzles. You're not trying to you know, what's it, fast twitch reactions. Exactly. So things like that felt, they didn't feel any different to me, and you know, to my eyes, they looked absolutely amazing, and I was very happy with it.
Some people that are absolute nutters that are like, I can't run, you know, Space Marine on my ROG Ally, and I can get it. It's 15 frames a second it runs at. Other people are like, just want frame generation. Now I can get it to run at 28 frames. Oh my god, that would feel horrendous. It would feel like you're trying to walk through mud, you know, slowly during a blizzard. With controls, but some people are happy to do that. I'm not going to judge them, but I think the game needs to be locked to 30 minimum for frame generation to really, you know, feel decent, and ideally way more than that to actually, you know, genuinely be really good. But anyway, we're too long. I think we're well over the hour that we normally are. So Stu, where can you find us on the interwebs?
Oh, we're everywhere. We've got our website, consoleshock.net. We're on Twitter, X, Console Shock. You can find us on Facebook, Console Shock. You can find us on any sort of podcast client, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You say Stitcher, but I think that's gone now. So any sort of podcast client. I think they've all sort of picked up our thread of podcasts, and if you can't find us anywhere, please reach out, and I can try and get the thread onto any other sort of podcast software that you use.
Cool. Well, we hope you like this Q&A show. We didn't really cram in tons of Q&As, but we would love to do more of these. I'm sure we will do. If you do have any questions, you can add comments on the various platforms that you pick up our show, and we'll have a look and maybe we'll answer those questions. But as always, thanks for listening to the show, and we will catch you in the next one. Take care.
Take it easy. Goodbye.